Welcome to the Religious Studies Podcast.
Uh,
This is a deep dive curated just for you. And a quick note before we begin this episode is brought to you with the help of AI. But don't worry, everything has been carefully fact-checked by our expert.
it's always great to see how technology can help us explore these topics.
All right, let's jump into ancient Greece. When you picture ancient Greece, I bet those magnificent temples probably come to mind, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
But, we're not just going to admire the architecture here. We're going to try to uncover how the ancient Greeks viewed these sacred spaces and how they saw them not just as buildings, but as reflections of their entire understanding of the universe.
And that's what makes this so intriguing, right? Unlike some ancient cultures that left us, detailed records about their religious symbolism, the Greeks weren't so explicit.
So it's kind of like a puzzle then, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We have to use archaeological clues and hints from their myths to decipher their beliefs. We're going to be like detectives of ancient thought.
Exactly. And this lack of direct explanation, it makes each discovery even more valuable. It's like unlocking a hidden chamber in their worldview.
Okay, so to get started, let's focus on two key terms. The temenos, which was the sacred precinct, and the naos, the temple itself. Now, to help us navigate this world, we're going to draw on the work of the Paris School. These are scholars who offered some compelling interpretations of Greek cosmology, particularly through the lens of animal sacrifice.
Yeah, their research suggests that the division of the sacrificial animal offering the burnt bones to the gods and the cooked meat to humans, that this reflects a deeper division between the divine, human, and natural realms.
So it wasn't just about the physical act of sacrifice, right? It's about maintaining this cosmic order, this balance between mortals and the gods.
Yeah.
It's about defining, where we fit in the grand scheme of things.
Precisely. The ritual of sacrifice becomes a way to reinforce the proper relationship between humanity and the divine.
All right, to bring this to life, let's picture the Athenian Acropolis. I'm sure many of you have this iconic sight in mind. Imagine the Panathenaic procession. This is this grand event where Athenians would journey from the city's edge all the way up to the Acropolis.
It's a symbolic journey indeed, a transition from the everyday, the profane world of the city up to the sacred realm of the gods, a physical and spiritual ascent.
And as they entered this sacred space, they would cleanse themselves at the perianterion, these washing basins placed at the entrances, almost like a ritual purification, leaving behind the dust of the outside world before entering the sacred space.
Yeah, it really emphasizes that act of crossing a boundary, a threshold between two distinct realms.
And speaking of boundaries, the sanctuary had some strict taboos, didn't it? Things like birth, sex, and death were absolutely forbidden within its walls.
Yes, and these taboos, I think they get to the heart of how the Greeks viewed the divine. The gods represented the eternal, the unchanging, while birth, sex, and death are hallmarks of our cyclical mortal existence. So by excluding these things from the sanctuary, they drew a sharp distinction between these two realms.
And to emphasize this separation even further, think about how they placed cemeteries outside the city walls. It's like this physical and symbolic barrier between the living and the dead.
All these elements work together to create this sense of a clearly defined order within the cosmos.
Okay, now let's shift gears for a moment and travel back in time to Mycenae, a powerful city in pre-classical Greece, and consider the Lion Gate. This monumental entrance is crowned with a fascinating image, two powerful lions flanking a central column.
It's fascinating how, even though it predates the classical temples by centuries, the Lion Gate may offer some clues to understanding later Greek architectural symbolism, particularly on the Acropolis.
And that brings us back to the Acropolis, where we find an archaic temple with lions sculpted onto its pediment, standing triumphantly over a slain bull. Now, I can't help but wonder, what message were they trying to convey by placing these powerful wild creatures at the entrance to a sacred space dedicated to the gods? Could it be a way of showcasing the power of the gods?
That's a great question, and honestly, the interpretation of these lions has sparked a lot of debate among scholars. Some see them as guardians, protectors of the sacred space, warding off evil. Others see them as symbolic representations of the raw power of nature, a power that can be both beneficial and destructive.
So we're back to that idea of balance again, right? This tension between the civilized world represented by the temple and the untamed forces of nature embodied by the lions. I wonder, did the Greeks view them as strictly opposing forces, or was their worldview more nuanced than that?
That's a really important point. The Greeks recognized the interconnectedness of nature and culture. They didn't necessarily see them as diametrically opposed, but rather as forces that were constantly interacting and shaping each other.
To help unpack this further, let's consider the concept of a portal, as described by the anthropologist Edmund Leach. He saw portals as Thresholds of thresholds, places of transition and ambiguity. And the entrance to the temple with these powerful, often ambiguous figures like lions and Medusa perfectly embodies this concept, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's a liminal space, a bridge between the human and divine realms. And the presence of these figures reinforces the idea of crossing a boundary, entering a realm where the usual categories and rules don't quite apply.
And here's a fascinating detail. The lion on the Acropolis is actually androgynous, possessing both male and female characteristics. What do you make of that?
Oh, it's a detail that really underscores the liminal nature of the temple entrance. These figures like Medusa with her monstrous hybridity defy easy categorization. They embody the blurring of boundaries that occurs in these transitional spaces.
So we've been focusing on the entrance, but what about the temple itself? Was it just a backdrop for the altar, or did it play a more active role?
That's a crucial question. While some might argue that its primary function was to house the cult statue, I believe it played a much more active role in the ritual process. Think of it as a container, a vessel for the divine presence. Scholar Jean-Pierre Vernant, for instance, argued that the temple's exterior reflects the power residing in the statue inside.
So there's a dynamic interplay between the inside and the outside the temple. The exterior, with its potentially chaotic imagery of lions, monsters, and hybrid creatures, hints at the power contained within. But then we see this structured order in the temple's architecture itself. The columns, the triglyphs, the metopes, all arranged in this specific harmonious way.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're presenting these two contrasting ideas, chaos and order.
That's a great observation. The architectural order, with its clear rules and proportions, could be seen as a way of containing and channeling the raw power that the Greeks associated with the divine, almost like they were trying to impose a sense of order on a realm that was inherently unpredictable and potentially dangerous. It makes you wonder what the Greeks believed about the nature of the divine. Was it something to be feared, revered, or both? We'll delve into that in part two. It's remarkable how these ancient structures still kind of resonate with us today, right? They invite us to decipher their secrets. I think that's part of what draws so many people to the study of ancient religions. It's like we're trying to understand these fundamental questions that have always preoccupied humanity.
I completely agree. It's like stepping back in time and trying to grasp the mindset of people who lived thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
And speaking of mysteries, let's talk about that most crucial element within the temple, the cult statue.
Yeah, the heart of the sanctuary, the dwelling place of the god. This is where things get really interesting because, the beliefs surrounding the cult statue are complex.
Okay, so we know that the statue was housed inside the temple, kept separate from the activities at the altar. But was it just a representation of the god, or did the Greeks believe that the god actually inhabited the statue?
Well, that's a question that has generated a lot of discussion. Some scholars argue for a symbolic interpretation, viewing the statue as a focal point for worship, a way to connect with the divine. But others believe that the Greeks, to some extent, actually saw the statue as imbued with the actual presence of the god. It wasn't just a piece of art, it was a sacred object, a conduit to the divine realm.
It's incredible to think about the level of reverence they must have felt for these statues. The Greeks were meticulous record keepers, documenting everything from their political systems to their agricultural practices. So why wouldn't they have left behind some kind of guidebook on how to interpret their temples and statues?
You would think so, right? But that's part of the enigma. While we have some scattered references in their literature, there's no single text that lays out a comprehensive system of symbolism.
Which, as you said earlier, makes our exploration that much more fascinating. We have to become detectives, piecing together clues from all these different sources, archaeology, mythology, ritual practices, to get a sense of how the Greeks understood these spaces.
Exactly. It's not just about the physical remains, but the entire cultural context in which these sanctuaries existed.
Okay, let's go back to that archaic temple on the Acropolis with the androgynous lion. We talk about how the lion, with its blurring of male and female characteristics, embodies the liminal nature of the portal. But what about that slain bull beneath its claws? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, the image of a powerful predator subduing its prey is a pretty common motif in ancient art, not just in Greece. It often symbolizes the triumph of order over chaos civilization, over untamed nature.
I see what you mean. So maybe we can view the slain bull as representing those raw, unbridled aspects of nature that need to be controlled or channeled for the benefit of humanity.
That's a very plausible interpretation, and it connects nicely to our discussion of the architectural order of the temple. The structured columns, the triglyphs, and metopes, they all represent this human attempt to impose order and create stability within a world that can often feel chaotic and unpredictable.
So in a way, the entire temple complex is a reflection of this struggle between chaos and order, between humanity's desire to understand and control the forces that shape our existence.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that the Greeks didn't necessarily view this as a simple binary opposition. They recognized that interconnectedness of nature and culture, the fact that these forces are constantly influencing and shaping each other.
You know, we can't talk about Greek sanctuaries without mentioning the concept of miasma, this idea of ritual pollution that could arise from various actions, particularly those related to death.
Ah, miasma. It's a crucial concept for understanding Greek religion. It highlights their concern with purity and, the potential for contamination. Those washing basins we mentioned earlier, the perihanteria, they were meant to cleanse visitors of any miasma they might be carrying, ensuring they didn't pollute the sacred space.
And this fear of pollution wasn't just about physical cleanliness, right?
Right.
It extended to moral and spiritual purity as well.
Absolutely. Certain actions like murder or violating a sacred oath were considered particularly polluting and required elaborate purification rituals to restore balance and appease the gods.
So this concern with maintaining order and purity permeated every aspect of the sanctuary, from the placement of the buildings, to the rituals they performed, to the iconography that adorned the temples. It really shows just how deeply these beliefs influenced their lives, and how these spaces were about so much more than just worship. They were reflections of their worldview, their understanding of their place in the cosmos.
Precisely. They were microcosms of their world, embodying their fears, aspirations, and beliefs about the nature of the universe.
We've covered so much ground, but we're not done yet. There's still more to explore. In part 3 of our deep dive, we'll uncover even more fascinating insights into the world of Greek sanctuaries. It's really amazing how these structures built thousands of years ago can still offer us so much insight into a culture's beliefs and values.
Yeah, they really are like time capsules, aren't they? Preserving not just architectural styles, but an entire world view. And I think what strikes me the most is just how interconnected everything is. The myths, the rituals, the architectural choices, they all weave together to create this incredibly rich and meaningful tapestry.
You're right. We've talked about the temenos, the noos, the cult statue, the taboos, the concept of miasma. But there's one element we haven't really touched on yet, the roof. It might seem like kind of a mundane detail, but I have a feeling it's anything but.
You're absolutely right. The roof of a Greek temple was far more than just a practical necessity. It played a significant symbolic role.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's start with the shape. Why the pitched roof with those sloping sides? Was it purely for aesthetics, or was there like a deeper meaning?
Well, aesthetics certainly played a part, but the pitched roof also had symbolic significance. It created a triangular space, and the Greeks associated this shape with the heavens, the realm of the gods.
Oh, so the shape of the roof itself was a way of visually connecting the temple to the divine realm. It's like they were drawing a line between the earthly and the celestial.
Precisely. And this connection is further emphasized by the decorative elements they often added to the roof. Think of the acroteria, those sculptures placed at the peak and corners of the pediment.
Right. They often depicted mythical creatures, heroes, or even the gods themselves.
Exactly. These figures elevated above the rest of the temple, they act as intermediaries between the human and divine realms. They occupy that liminal space we've been discussing.
It's fascinating how they use these subtle architectural choices to guide our gaze upwards towards the heavens. It reinforces that connection between the earthly and the divine.
And it doesn't stop there. Even the decorative elements along the roofline, like the antefixes, often featured motifs related to the sky and weather, clouds, lightning bolts, winged creatures.
It's like they created this miniature cosmos atop the temple, with the roof serving as this bridge between the earth and the heavens.
I love that image. And this brings us back to our earlier discussion about the Greek concept of order. The roof, with its structured design and carefully chosen decorative elements, reinforces this idea of a harmonious universe governed by divine laws.
So it's not just about those grand, awe-inspiring elements like the monumental entrances or the imposing statues. It's about those subtle details, those carefully chosen elements that all work together to create a unified and meaningful whole. It makes you appreciate the level of thought and intention that went into designing these sacred spaces.
Absolutely. And it's that interconnectedness, that attention to detail that makes these sanctuaries so fascinating to study. They offer us a glimpse into a worldview that was both complex and beautifully integrated.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of Greek sanctuaries. I hope you've enjoyed exploring these fascinating spaces with us. And remember to subscribe to the Religious Studies podcast for more deep dives into the world of religion. Thank you for listening.